Hi everyone. Thanks for joining me again for another installment of my solar season 2020 series. I'm in my car office again, so I might just disappear the video and go ahead. So this morning we are there's a Scorpio moon about to rise here where I am in Western Australia, and yeah, we're in Virgo season as of the last few days. So yeah, without further ado, I've been working on this slideshow, and I've realized this morning that the month has begun, the season has begun, and I really need to just get on and share with you all. So instead of nitpicking, I was getting a bit in my Virgo head a little bit. This image again is from Leonis, Virgo, from his zodiac series, and I think it might be my favorite so far. I'm going to begin with this quote from the amazing storyteller Roald Dahl, and this beautiful painting by Peter Paul Rubens called The Three Graces. Above all, watch with glittering eyes the whole world around you, because the greatest secrets are always hidden in the most unlikely places. Those who don't believe in magic will never find it. Roald Dahl had the sun in Virgo opposite Chiron in Pisces. And just to, what's really been striking me the last few weeks really is how it's sort of been a bit of a reminder that life is really lived in the everyday, in that kind of Mercury realm of the mundane kind of reality of monotony sometimes, repetitious kinds of things that we have to do all the time, eat and sleep and work and, you know, function on this very in this very ordinary kind of world. And even though the world at the moment is completely extraordinary, there are still many gifts to be found, I think, in the minutiae. So that's where I want to sort of begin with Virgo today. And this poem comes from the poet and spoken word artist Kate Tempest, who has Ceres in Virgo as the apex of a yod. So Eris Hygeia in Aries and Jupiter in Aquarius. She has a Capricorn sun opposite her Pallas Athena as well. So it's called The Point. The days, they break to fade. What fills them I'll forget. Every touch and smell and taste, the sun about to set. Can never last, it breaks my heart. Each joy feels like a threat. Although there's beauty everywhere, its shadow is regret. Still, something in the coming dusk whispers not to fret. Don't matter that we'll lose today. It's not tomorrow yet. So our Virgo season begins off the back of the Leo lunar cycle, the new moon in Leo, for which was conjunct Mercury, and Mercury of course rules Virgo, and the South Node was conjunct the galactic, or still is, conjoined with the galactic center. So something's incoming, hey, and something's outgoing, and there's some major energy flow going on. So yeah, here we are in the Virgo solar cycle, and what came to me was the idea of bringing that leonine generosity and warmth and open-heartedness into this month that is much of a portal into some difficult times ahead. So the superior conjunction of Mercury with the Sun was on the 17th, which was trine to Mars conjunct Eris, which was exact on the 18th of August. noblesse oblige is sort of the fusion for me of the that idea of nobility and bringing that Leo into Virgo, and how we must serve from that place of Leo, that we have gifts to share and use in service to others. Are we able to bring our bold creativity down to earth for practical form and function, and finding deliverance in the details of life, like I was talking about, the small things that save us, you know, the little things that can almost go unnoticed, and yeah, maybe a little attention can be paid to that this season. And just recognizing how without that critical thinking function, we become lost. You know, that Virgo mind can be very, of course, as with all the signs, there's a shadow, and it can get overdone, and we can become hypercritical of ourselves and others. But definitely we need our capacity to critique and to look at things and look at life and look at our experiences and the information that we're receiving with that critical mind, which is a lot to do with, you know, the nodes, the nodal axis being in Gemini, Sagittarius now, and Neptune square and all of that. So we'll get into all of that, but just recognizing the humbling that takes place through the transitional archetype of Virgo. This image from Jean-Baptiste Griots, who had Venus, Mercury, Pluto in Virgo, is called Broken Eggs. And this quote, "Things can change in a day," from the incredible storyteller, writer Arundhati Roy, who wrote The God of Small Things, which just came to me when I was thinking about Virgo, that amazing, you know, that's kind of aligns with Virgo for me, that God of Small Things as a concept. And certainly things can change in a day, as we know, when, you know, big crises occur, and yes, it upends all of what we've known. So yeah, just another idea to go into the month with. So the sun ingressed into Virgo on the 22nd, or just the 22nd, it was almost the 23rd here, and immediately applies to oppose series, which is for me quite significant this month. And Mercury was already in Virgo before the sun, and yeah, just that the rulership of Mercury being in Virgo, and finding practical applications for our experiences in an effort to serve the whole, which is the, you know, that shifting from Leo to Virgo and bringing it into a functional form that can be of use to our other when we get to Libra. I think it's a really interesting month, as the sun has now separated from the Capricorn oppositions and the quincunxes with the Capricorn stellium, and yeah, so the sun moves into, well, is immediately trine to Uranus in Taurus, and Mercury as well, of course, and as that sort of perfects and then begins to separate, the sun moves to trine Pallas Athena, Jupiter, and so on through Capricorn. So it's kind of like that, we might sort of begin to have a bit of clarity, I was thinking, this month around what this is all for, you know, all this difficulty that we've all faced as a collective in 2020. And of course, we've all got our different experiences of that and different things coming up. But we are certainly in this incredibly powerful time together. And so we're having archetypally the same experience on some level, or at least similar. You know, there's that, I mean, that's what astrology is all about, that we're all in this ordered cosmos together. And of course we have our birth charts, and everything is relating, everything that's current is relating to what's past in different ways, but and what's personal for us. But yeah, on an archetypal level, of course, it all resonates to the same, or at the very least, very similar, like vibration, I guess. Yeah. So the sun will, of course, oppose Neptune, and Neptune is retrograde, square the lunar nodes. There is that still that potential for the confusion, disillusionment, and distraction. I suppose that many people are in a world of a world of pain and suffering, and as well seeking to escape from that suffering through means of drugs and alcohol, of course, and even just like social media and you know, streaming services and all those kinds of things as well. So just the remembering that Neptune piece doesn't have to be a negative, and that the imagination, dream work, and creative kinds of activities aid in our process. And it's, you know, as we know, it's like that skipped step when a square to the nodes, there's that, and we need to resolve through that south node in Sagittarius. So really looking at our belief systems and those kinds of things. So and our worldview and all of those kinds of big ideas, you know. I think that's going to become prevalent this Virgo season. So the planetary shifts, Mercury is really busy this month. Mercury is always busy, but Venus is really busy this month. Mars, of course, is conjunct Eris and square to Capricorn and will station retrograde on the 10th of September. Pallas Athena stations direct on the 5th of September. Jupiter stations direct on the 12th. Hygeia ingresses into Leo on the 12th as well. And I just wanted to make a note of asteroid Persephone is retrograde in Pisces and square to the nodes through now and early to mid-September. And yeah, just is felt I wanted to include her because it's that echo of the series piece and the dark feminine and the initiation we're all going through now. To me, the work of Brené Brown's pretty important, and I think this little quote, which is sort of taken from a few places, I've sort of amalgamated a bit of her work into one quote that sort of represents for me a lot of like the importance of her work. So she studies vulnerability, but as she says herself that she came to vulnerability through shame, through research into shame. And I thought that's so interesting. When I looked at her chart, she has the sun in Scorpio and a Virgo moon, which is separating from the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And in the 60s, I think she's 64, I think. So yeah, and that is conjunct her midheaven, the Virgo moon and Uranus-Pluto. So it's an opposite to, of course, Chiron and Ceres in Pisces. And I just thought, like, it's just such a perfect kind of, I mean, she's living her psychic reality beautifully in terms of what she's offering the world and bringing forth out of the dark, you know, out of shame comes our greatest gift and our opportunity to become open to wholehearted living is what she calls it. So she says here, I define vulnerability as emotional risk, exposure, uncertainty. It fuels our daily lives. Vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage and is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, and change. which is so much about where we're at now. And I think about that uncertainty. You know, we are in such uncertain times, and we are exposed in terms of our emotional rawness, our shadows emerging in close quarters with loved ones or in isolation. All of those things are really coming up, and we are very vulnerable, including to our own mortality, being faced with the fear of death and all those kinds of things. So the sun in aspect, shall I list all of these? Everybody can read. And I feel like it gets a little bit tedious, doesn't it, when I just read off of a slide and list all of this stuff. But I guess I'll just talk around it a little bit. So the opposition to Ceres is on the 28th, which is the midpoint of the Ceres retrograde. Just shifting in my seat because I'm in my car office. The quincunx to Chiron. So that Ceres sun cycle, of course, began back in January in Capricorn season, along with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, and Pallas Athena was around too at the time, and of course Mercury. So yes, it's all of what we're seeing now. It's sort of this the sun opposing Ceres is like this culmination of that cycle in a way, because we've already had the sun opposite, you know, the sun through Cancer, during which the sun opposed Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, and Pallas Athena, and those retrogrades are now beginning to slow to direct. And yeah, so just reflecting on how far we've come, how different the world is from January, and we're really in a different place now. And Virgo season is a good time to look back and reflect on all of that and see what that means for us. I'll talk a little bit more about that Ceres sun opposition in a few minutes, but yeah, the quincunx to Chiron, so that cycle began in April, and the trine to Uranus, that cycle began in May. So always like relating back to the beginning of cycles or the aspects prior is so useful when we're looking at our own lives and the developments that we're observing and experiencing. So yeah, and the opposition to Neptune, of course, is the midpoint of that retrograde cycle, and that's on the 12th of September. The quincunx to Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith today is in, the true Black Moon Lilith is in Pisces today. And true Black Moon Lilith is erratic, you know, she moves around really crazy. Mean Black Moon Lilith is conjunct Mars and Eris in Aries still. So but either way, Black Moon Lilith is heavily involved in the Mars retrograde later this month, so, and for the coming months. The sun will go on to trine Pluto on the 15th of September, and then quincunx to Eris on the 17th of September, and square the lunar nodes, which is significant, of course, at just ahead of the new moon. Later in the month, coming close to the end of Virgo season, and then the trine to Saturn and the quincunx to Mars, which by that point will be retrograde, and that's on the 20th of September. This image comes from Leonore Finney, who has Sun Venus in Virgo, sorry about that. And I was just revisiting Melanie Reinhardt's beautiful book on Chiron and came across this quote. Chiron safeguards our humanity, prompting us to look down as well as up, to humble ourselves before pain, and to value the dark recesses of our imagination, as well as the bright light of our Olympian visions of possibility. And I always relate Chiron to Virgo in my mind. And some people would talk about the rulership there, and I think it's quite a good fit. For me, it feels quite a good fit. And the quote that always comes to mind is Leonard Cohen's lyric, or, you know, beautiful words, "There is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." And he had Sun, Venus, Neptune in Virgo rising, and I love that quote. And another Virgo type, she's actually Sun in Leo, Kate Bush. I think it's important that things are flawed. She had Pluto and Mercury in Virgo. And it's true, you know, our capacity to relate to others in meaningful ways comes from that place of vulnerability. And when we recognize our own brokenness, we can really get on the level with people instead of feeling somewhat inflated like we can in Leo, which is important too, you know, learning to fill up, take up space, but as well learning to humble that is also important for us all. Another amazing Virgo is Mary Shelley, who's been in my mind a lot this year, and her amazing story of Frankenstein, which she wrote when she was, I think, 19 years old. She had Mars, Sun, Uranus, Ceres, Juno, Pallas Athena, and Mercury all in Virgo, square to the lunar nodes, and Moon in Sagittarius. And this image just comes from the motion picture of Frankenstein from 1931. And the famous scene of the monster befriending Maria. There is something at work in my soul which I do not understand. I am practically industrious, painstaking, a workman to execute with perseverance and labour. But besides this, there is a love for the marvellous, intertwined in all my projects, which hurries me out of the common pathways of men, even to the wild sea and unvisited regions I am about to explore. And it's just out of the book Frankenstein. So it's also subtitled The Modern Day Prometheus, I think. Yes, so it's an amazing piece of literature. I hope everyone can, I'm bringing forth what I'm coming into contact with in my own daily life, in the hope that, well, with the understanding that my experience is a microcosm of others' experiences. And so I believe wholeheartedly in that, honouring this process of my own life, and the bits and pieces that come to me will have value for others as well. So I hope people don't find it too irrelevant or too much of a digression, or for me it feels like the point that I'm trying to make this month is that it's these little things that actually call us forward and keep us on track in some way, even if they are little dalliances or seemingly kind of meaningless. But yeah, I think that that's where beauty is to be found at the moment, at least at the moment, if not all the time. You know, I think Virgo is always such an important piece. Anyway, so Mercury through Virgo, and again, here's the list of all the aspects that Mercury makes through Virgo this month, and then Mercury, of course, moves on to Libra and will emerge as an evening star from under the beams in the early days of September. So that will be lovely to see Mercury as the evening star again. I'm not going to talk around all of those too much. I think I'll let you take your screenshot and have it for your records, but it becomes a little tedious, hey. The sun opposite to Ceres retrograde. So that midpoint of the retrograde phase of the cycle, and that correlating to that kind of full moon illumination. And Jeffrey Wolf Green writes about that time as bringing the individual meaning into a social context. So yeah, I think like we've sort of had that experience over the past couple of months with the sun through Cancer and Leo, and or particularly through Cancer. So, and then we've gone through that quincunx process as well, the adjustment, and so now as the sun comes to trine Capricorn planets, that will evolve that part of our process in a different, in a further development. But while we're here, and now the sun applying to oppose Ceres these days, I think it's just so, she's so worth including and making a particular point of her presence in all of this. And I know a lot's been made of her with the food shortages and things like that. Of course, that's all relevant. But yeah, just as well as nourishment, that not only in terms of food, although of course food is such an important part of our health, and fresh food and making good healthy choices and those kinds of things, but perhaps we don't make or give the same weight to our choices about what we take in terms of like the content we watch and listen to and read. And I think, you know, I'm kind of preaching to the converted with this particular audience, but it's always worth being aware of that, where our time is going, where our energy is being spent, and recognizing as well Ceres as the nourisher and nourishment via process, and she is very much to do with that life cycle and the seasons. And here in the southern hemisphere, I'm watching the emergence or the re-emergence of spring after winter here. We're still technically in winter, of course, but looking around, it looks like spring and it's getting warmer. And yeah, so it's really feels nice to include the Ceres part of all of this, that she is the goddess of the grain. And it occurred to me a couple of years ago, I did this little dodgy, sketchy painting of this wheat, and because I was thinking about how the, you know, like, and I'm not criticizing anybody or taking away from anybody's legitimate health concerns, but how like wheat has been kind of demonized in recent times. And I personally love wheat. I love bread. And yeah, I really like to just think about how grains and wheat sort of also relate us back to the dawning of civilization in a way, and how we learn to bake bread and things like that. It sort of harkens back to our roots, and I just think that's interesting. And as well, I quote just Jason Holly again, for the Ceres retrograde as a time of coming to terms with a loss of innocence as we are brought down to earth. I think that is incredibly insightful for this series, this part of the Ceres cycle. And just reflecting on the Ceres story and the loss of her daughter and the grief, and as well as there are many, so much has been written, and particularly I've read recently quite a bit of feminist sort of literature about this story, and there are many different perspectives on it, but it seems to me with Persephone and Ceres or Demeter, that there's that necessary separation, hey? And although Pluto can be imagined and is imagined by some as like a patriarchal dark force, for me, I think more about Pluto in a kind of feminine way, and not to we don't have to genderize everything. I don't mean that, but I just lately it's felt much more real and rich for me to explore the square between Eris and Pluto, the waning square, the three-quarter square, as between feminine forces, between and what's actually coming up for us all in that sense of the dark feminine. And I know it can be quite a shock to awaken to things that we've been unconscious of, and it's all of a sudden we are disillusioned and sometimes angry or rageful, even because we see things that we hadn't seen before, and we feel played or manipulated, or as if we've been taken for a ride. All those kinds of things are really coming up now, and have been for a long time. Of course, you know, feminism and in all its waves, and there's been a movement for a long time. But to me, it definitely doesn't. It doesn't only relate to women. It's definitely for us all. I think this emerging conscious feminine, it's definitely happening in women. And I hear and talk to a lot of women and a lot of mothers, and we're all kind of feeling on the precipice of something really important. And so I really want to honor that, but I certainly never want to demonize men or the masculine. And I don't believe that we benefit from doing that. But I do see the importance and the necessity of having those separations where we sort of are jolted out of our innocence, where we actually come into a new reality of looking at things from a new perspective, where all of a sudden we think, oh, how did I miss that? Yeah, I hope I'm not waffling. I hope you see where I'm coming from with that. But yeah, I included another Peter Paul Rubens image. This is, I can't say this, Abundantia, the goddess, the Roman goddess. And he had Jupiter in Virgo, so that's how I snuck him in a couple of his paintings. But cornucopia and abundance and the horn of plenty, which links back for me to Capricorn, Jupiter being in Capricorn at the moment, and how, you know, that it's very easy to look at all of what we're going through a negative lens, of course, and looking at everything that we've lost, seemingly lost opportunities and plans gone to ruin, and all of that is compelling. But as well, there's always a silver lining. Hey, I have Moon Sag. I'm the eternal optimist. I can't help but feel that there's just so much that we will take away from this very humbling and difficult year, and there are many blessings to count, even though perhaps right now it doesn't feel that way for many people. And I have great compassion for people who are suffering, and I've been doing readings with people who are having very difficult times, and I don't ever want to detract from or minimize people's pain and suffering. But at the same time, there's always something to feel grateful for, isn't there? The Pisces full moon. So where the moon, of course, is waxing. Is she risen yet? I can't see her yet. I'm facing the east horizon. So yeah, as I said, in Scorpio and waxing towards fullness in Pisces in a week's time. So just over a week actually. So yes, there is plenty to digest over these coming days, and the moon has been opposite to Uranus yesterday, and will come through Capricorn, of course, on its way to Pisces. Yeah, so, and through Aries, of course, too. Yeah, so the aspects between the full moon aspects Uranus from 10 degrees of Virgo. So of Virgo Pisces, the moon is in Pisces and the sun is in Virgo, of course, and the Capricornucopia. When I started this slideshow, I got a bit caught up in the idea of the Capricornucopia, which is how I had been imagining it earlier in the year, the Capricorn stellium and all the Capricorn activity, as trying not to get too stuck in that idea of the like, I don't want to deny the difficulties ever, and of course we are having great losses, but yes, there is also nature remains abundant, even though, and we need to sort of suffer through the periods of difficulty, loss, and lack in order to come back to that spring place of plenty. Yeah, so as well, the moon will be conjoined, as it applies to as it waxes to fullness, will be conjoined with Ceres, and then separating from that conjunction with Ceres by the time it reaches its peak fullness, and applying to Neptune. So there's a real there's a lot of energy there, both retrograde Ceres and Neptune. And it sort of harkens back to that Pisces new moon, of course, of 6 months ago, and the Mercury retrograde as well in February, which was over the same territory where we now find Ceres. So, and yeah, so this lunation is, it's not quite in that territory, but there is that harkening back, that sort of echo of that, and just the reminder of that period of time where Mercury was retrograde in February at the beginning of Pisces and back into Aquarius. Yeah, so I misspoke. Well, it is the same territory where the full moon is. I shouldn't have said that. I got confused in my own head for a minute there. I'm sorry. So yeah, it is that same territory, and it is worth reflecting back on that period of time, and just what sort of came up for us then, and how that relates to what's coming up for us now under the light of that full moon. So as well, the co-rulers of Pisces are, of course, Gemini and Neptune, and they are in their waning sextile in that cycle that began 2009, I think. And yeah, so that's, you know, a harmonious aspect again. That's sort of, there's that flowing opportunity potential around this full moon. Yeah, there's obviously quite a lot of dynamic and more difficult aspects as well, and yeah, again, I don't want to detract from that, but there is always something positive to look to. Mercury will be trine to the Capricorn stellium as well at this full moon, and there is the mutable cross, speaking of the dynamic action, and Mercury is square to the lunar nodes, bringing in that discernment piece. Mercury in Virgo, our capacity to discriminate and discern amidst all the information, misinformation, opinion, rhetoric, ideals, and ideologies, which is such a big part of that South Node in Sagittarius. Yeah, it's very challenging to navigate all of this, but I think that this full moon offers us, it's conjunct Neptune, so there's certainly that dreamy quality, but perhaps we can use it in the reimagination of things we're witnessing, and trying to see things from alternate positions, but remaining grounded in that Virgo-ness that's so healthy in relation to Pisces, that keeps our feet on the ground. And of course the cardinal cross and the Mars Saturn square that we're in now. All of that is ongoing and challenging and very dynamic, and I think it's always worth mentioning the idea of the dynamism within conflict and the to and fro that occurs even intrapsychically, within us, where we have to reconcile differences within us, and in relationships where we have two people who want different things and it feels irreconcilable quite often, diametrically opposed, or very, very difficult, very uncomfortable. All of that is where our work is to be done. And I think recognizing the need to sometimes just take a pause, that we don't I say that while Mars is in Aries. It's not easy to pause while Mars is in Aries, but of course we will be faced with frustration while Mars is square to Saturn and retrograde. There's going to be plenty of causes to pause, I think. So following the full moon, Mercury ingresses into Libra and is visible as an evening star by this point. Will be opposite to Chiron on the 11th of September. That conjunction, of course, was in April. The waxing crescent moon in Libra with Mercury. Sorry, that's a big jump there. I confused myself a little bit. So that comes. What have I got? Oh, I don't have a date for the square to Pluto, but of course it will be. Now I'm confusing myself. Okay, so the waxing crescent moon in Libra will of course follow on from the Virgo full moon, new moon, I should say, and so later in the season, close to the end of the season, and Mercury will square Libra at 22. We'll square Pluto at 22.5 degrees, and Pluto's still retrograde at that point, and trine the North Node on the 22nd of September. And opposing to Eris. So that opposition to Eris occurs when the Sun is in the final minute of Virgo. So a potent little moment on the 22nd of September, and somewhere in there, forgive me for leaving out the date there for the exact square to Pluto, but we can it's certainly active through that time. The 19th through the 22nd certainly will be have the potential to be aware of that Mercury square to Pluto, which may bring a certain, another development in our consciousness amidst all of what's going on. It's just one among many challenging aspects, but I really like, especially during Virgo and Gemini seasons, it's always worth paying special attention to Mercury. But I always like to keep Mercury in the picture because the fast movement of Mercury and the continuation of things, the flow of information and the quick nature of our minds, and the capacity to get stuck in the monkey mind and all of that is all a part of it. And that urge to move and keep things moving is very mercurial. And then the retrograde of Mercury, which ties in, so the next Mercury retrograde will be in Scorpio back into Libra next season, in Libra season, and ties in very much to the Mars retrograde as well. But of course we'll talk more about that then. So on to beautiful Venus, who's our morning star at the moment, and on the 16th of August she was at her third eye chakra moon gate, which I talked a little bit about this last month, and I like to include this idea because I think it's such a worthwhile journey to go on with Venus, her descent as the morning star. So each month she aligns with the waning crescent moon at some point in the zodiac, and so for this season that occurred at 7 degrees of Cancer on the 16th of August, and that is aligned with, so the third eye chakra is of course themes to do with perception, intellectualism, and the idea of living above the neck, which does not match so well with Venus in Cancer, of course, but it certainly can match with Mercury, but keeping the grounded Mercury through Virgo and then into Libra, and that objectification, which can occur to an extreme, so that we forget our physical experience sometimes and we become disembodied and dissociated. Venus through Cancer is certainly a reminder to not allow that to happen too often, or at least if that's our bent, if that's our tendency, Venus through Cancer reminds us that our emotions are our guide, and as well as our physical body, and how we experience our emotions within our physical body, helps us to not get stuck in that living above the neck problem. So Venus, of course, opposing Jupiter pretty much now. The 26th of August is exact, and trine to Neptune on the 28th of August in that beautiful harmonious relationship. That cycle began in January, I think. So developments in that kind of imaginal realm, is a nice thing to keep in mind this month, I think, in relation to the Neptune retrograde and the Neptune Sun opposition later, and of course this Venus in Cancer trine to Neptune in Pisces. Venus will oppose Pluto on the 30th of August and square Eris on the 1st of September, then oppose Saturn on the 2nd of September, conjoin Hygeia on the 4th of September, and of course Hygeia was very much involved in Venus's retrograde in Gemini. They travelled along together for quite a long time this year. And I think Hygeia is an important piece, of course, in the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for the hygiene and all of those things that Hygeia represents. But as well, I like to think about Hygeia as she is very much to do with holistic health, and she has quite she's quite separated now from Vesta, but she is, those two as well travel together a lot this year. And so just keeping that in mind, I guess, that the need to tend to our whole being, and how, all of our many needs that are not limited to our physical or our mental, but also our emotional and our spiritual and our, especially my favorite, our soul's needs. Keeping all of those things in mind is always important, and the conjunction between Venus and Hygeia is a lovely reminder of that. And then, so the relationship as well between Venus and Mars, which began in Virgo last year, so that was in August, and so we've been going through this cycle has been a very back and forth with Venus retrograde, and now we're going to have Mars retrograde. Venus will square Mars exactly at 27, almost 28 degrees of Aries Cancer on the 4th of September, and Mercury and Hygeia, as well as Eris and Black Moon Lilith, will be involved in that dynamic as well. And so we've had two prior squares within this synod. The first was in January, and then in June again, Mars and Venus were square to each other. So there's a real dynamic between them that's very alive through 2020 and ongoing. We'll come to the opposition of that while Mars is retrograde, the opposition of that cycle. The trine never completed, but it was well within orb for weeks, but never actually perfected. And then, yeah, we've come back to this waxing first quarter square. So again, so I just think it's worth giving consideration to how our values, Venus, align with our actions, and what can we learn from that, and where is our resources, where are our resources being spent, time and money, of course, being so pressing in our material reality, and yeah, what can we learn from reflecting on that? Venus will ingress into Leo on the 6th of September, and will then go on to quincunx series, while the moon is in Gemini at 3 degrees. So there's that aspect between Ceres and Gemini at that point. And then the trine to Chiron on the 14th of September. Oh, I've missed the date there again for that quincunx. I do apologise. Sometimes I get just I have 3 kids, and I'm often interrupted in the middle of working and then overlook going back to things. I do apologise. It's humbling, which is appropriate for Virgo season. Yeah, so the square to Uranus in Taurus on the 15th of September is exact, and then we come to our next moon gate when the waning crescent moon aligns with Venus in the morning sky again on the 14th of September, and that is the throat chakra moon gate in Leo, which, of course, the throat chakra has so much to do with communication. And thinking about communication, and Leo, of course, makes me think about the roaring, growling, moaning, howling lion. And I don't know actually if lions howl, but the howling of the soul and the howling of our inner, the unconscious, and what's calling to us from beyond that, in that mystery realm, in that liminal space of the dawn sky. And what can we hear and what can we perceive in that liminal light and that liminal space of quiet and Yeah, so the capacity to allow ourselves to speak our truth, even and perhaps especially when we know people aren't going to like it, and equally being able to hear truth that we don't necessarily like is a lot to do with the nodal axis in Gemini Sagittarius, and everything's up for consideration with Neptune square to the nodes and Mercury square to the nodes this month as well, while Mercury is in Virgo. And yeah, and then Venus conjoins Vesta again, having travelled along and then gone retrograde away and then come back again, likewise to Hygeia, which is exact on the 22nd of September, the prior conjunction that occurred on the 15th of April, which was ahead of the Venus retrograde and was involved in all of that. And at the time I was speaking in relation to Vesta a lot about the devotion to our inner flame and tending that inner flame. And so Venus's return to conjoin with Vesta in Leo is a beautiful reminder to that, amidst all of what's going on, all of the difficulties, all of the obvious stuff that we're seeing in the collective and in the media and in the world around us, and all of the obvious difficulties and challenges. Even amidst all of that, this, it's the little things, it's these little easily to ignore aspects that might be the things that get us through in terms of our sanity and in terms of our capacity to relate to our soul and our life and our inner flame, that keeps us on point and going in a direction that has meaning for us. This beautiful image is from Klimt, who was a Cancer, but he had the great conjunction that Jupiter-Saturn in Virgo in his birth chart. This one's called The Island in the Attersea, and this quote comes from Alain de Botton, who was the founder of the School of Life and has Pluto in Virgo square his sun in Sagittarius. He is a great meaning maker and a very talented writer, and he's quite a wise one, quite a leader these days, and I think it's a worthwhile place to spend time is with the School of Life, if you haven't heard of it before. So he says there was an interview, or like he and the woman I quoted last season, and now her name escapes me. I knew I should have kept a note of it. So she is a commentator, and I think she's like a stylist to stars and that sort of thing. But she is a black woman, an English black woman of African descent, and she and he had a conversation on Al Jazeera channel, and one of the things that they were talking about was kindness and how it is undervalued in our culture and in our society and in our world, perhaps. So this quote: "The root of kindness is knowing that you are sinful. If you can accept that you are not a totally good person, then you can start to accept that others are not going to be totally good either. It's a virtuous cycle of charity. In our culture, we condemn too much and we understand so little." I think it's so true. It's such a that's a big part of Virgo for me, is that humility that comes with it's like the back and forth between, that transition from Leo to Virgo to Libra in how we relate to others, which can only really happen through that sometimes humiliating process of recognizing that we are sinful and we are not totally good people, despite what we like to imagine or espouse. Or it's we are much more complicated than that. And that's such an important part of this current climate, I think. And it's easy to look at the collective and see, like, the obvious results of this Capricorn situation and the square to Eris in Aries. And I can never get away from the idea that despite the transpersonal nature of these planets, it is still a personal transit for us all. It's still impacting on our individual psyches, whether or not we are aware of it or willing to acknowledge it. But we all have Eris. We all are Eris on some level, and we all are Capricorn on some level, and we have all grown up, and we have all been conditioned many times over. If we look at it from that reincarnational perspective, there is so much ingrained in us that is a part of the problem, and a part of I say the problem, I say that in quotes, the problem that we are now dealing with, in that, is that the world is as it is. This is our problem. This is what's happening. We're looking at climate change. We're looking at pandemics. We're looking at unending unkindness and brutalization and killing and demonization, and ultimately comes back to projection of our own sinful nature upon our neighbors or colleagues or boss or kids or parents, or it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to see, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That is a necessary part of the process. That is a necessary piece of becoming aware of our own shadow, our own stuff, our own expelled dark feminine, our own denied patriarchal parts, our own, distorted masculine and distorted feminine, and all of that. We are all quite broken. We are all quite sinful. We are all quite guarded against all of those things as well. And so quite often, especially in relationship, especially when we're under duress and our relationships become stressful, when we can't go to work and we can't spend money like we would have done once, or go out and distract ourselves from the difficulties within our relationships or the difficulties within our own selves, we're left with screens where we again are confronted with parts of ourselves that we may not necessarily liked, plastered on screens, on the faces of others, and nameless others, of people who we can't relate to as people because they're just in the social media realm of unreality. But it's a can of worms, isn't it? It's a real rabbit hole. But yeah, I think this quote is very helpful. And so I also looked up the definition for charity, which is defined by Oxford as kindness and tolerance in judging others, and in the archaic sense, the love of humankind. We could all do with a bit of that. So of course, Mars retrograde. I've been talking for a long time, but I am getting close to the end. So we have our Mars retrograde from 28 to 15 degrees of Aries, which is going to impact on many of our Erises, of course, our natal Erises. And that occurs from the 10th of September through to the 14th of November, and the midpoint being in mid-October at the Mercury stationing retrograde point as well. So Mars will square Saturn today. Mars is square Saturn today. Mars will conjoin true black moon Lilith on again. There's been plenty of back and forth between, of course, the oscillating black moon Lilith on the 5th of September, that is exact again, and the station retrograde, as I said, occurs on the 10th of September in a cardinal cross with the square to Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter and Pallas Athena in Capricorn, square to Hygeia in Cancer, and the big piece, the big and often unacknowledged piece is Juno in Libra. Juno's been in Libra since last year, November, I think, if memory serves, and remains in Libra for just a few more days, really. She has been helpful, I think, in all of this, and I have found her guidance helpful throughout this year. And I think it's a big part of what we'll see in the Mars retrograde if we can honour Juno in her role, in her very helpful role, distorted as she has become in her vengefulness and her wrath as her jilted self by Zeus again and again and again, the philandering bastard. You know, there's so much more to Juno, to Hera than just that. So that she relates to fidelity. I'll talk about Juno in a few minutes anyway. As well, the station occurs in a trine to the south node and sextile to the north node, which is conjunct the moon at that time. Very much this is a part of our evolution, hey, our destiny, our paths forward that extend from what's been already, what's past, what's supposedly behind us, and what we're dragging along in our long black bag, as Robert Bly described it. Yes, much of what, yeah, I mean, where we are now always is the intersection between where we've been and where we're going. So Mars retrograde is a big moment to recognize that, is what I'm thinking. And the Sun opposite to Neptune at the time as well, Neptune retrograde in that midpoint of that cycle, and applying to square the lunar nodes in that mutable cross, which is relevant. This image is taken, my daughters love that Disney film Brave, which was created by Brenda Chapman, who has series Uranus, Vesta, Juno, Pluto, all in Virgo, sextile to Sun, Neptune, Venus in Scorpio, and square to Mars, which is conjunct her north node in Leo. And I just think she's done such a beautiful job with bundling that all up in the incredible Disney film Brave. I know Disney is a part of the problem perceived by many. I actually find Disney films to be, at least the recent ones, the ones that my kids watch, they're actually filled with wisdom, and I don't know how conscious that is on the part of Disney, on the part of the creators. You know, when we imagine Disney to be a part of the problem, but I think there's a lot more to it, and I think what I am always reminded of when I'm watching them and I'm finding these pearls of wisdom scattered throughout these animated films. When I say that, I'm talking about things like Frozen and Frozen 2 and Brave, and even Tangled is pretty wise, and which is the Rapunzel story. Anyway, because they all are old stories, so there is truth and wisdom in them. And even if they're reimagined in ways that don't necessarily sit well with our postmodern narratives or whatever, I don't even know, like these ideologies we've got going in our heads where we're all living above the neck and we think we know better, there's something in them that is very wise, and that actually knows something. It's part of that mystery. Anyway, so this image is of the tapestry that comes about in a culmination point in the movie. The bear, as representation of the feminine, the dark feminine shadow, perhaps, and the daughter, the wild, adventurous Merida. And the the movie ends with this idea that our fate lives within us. You only have to be brave enough to see it. And so Mars in Aries is so much to do with courage and bravery, isn't it? And it's thwarted when retrograde. There's that we've always got our desire nature, and much of our desire, many of our desires have been thwarted. All 2020, we're grounded, we're jobless, poor, bored, crazy, you know. it's so much has been brought up for all of us. So it's really apt that we've got now this Mercury retrograde that is, of course, going to bring plenty of things to a head in the collective. But my bent is always psychological, always about the inner and the archetypes working on us, and where that is all trying to lead us. So always the drum I like to bang is the dark feminine and the Eris, Black Moon, Lilith involvement in the Mars retrograde. For me, a lot of that is to do with the compensatory unconscious, and that links for me to art, and even art. Many would reject my claim to call a Disney film like Brave art, but for me it really is. And for me, there is so much of that compensatory unconscious involved in something like that, where that the muse, the muses take over in that creative process, and something is created, whether or not the people involved in it are even conscious of what they're creating or not. There is so much wisdom within something like that, and within art itself, and so much comes through that creative process. And I know, like, I'm saying things that people are already well aware of, but I just want to talk about and relate that side of the Mars retrograde, because there'll be so much that we can't do, but what can we do within the confines of our limitations, and what will we do with that? And recognizing that the unconscious is compensatory, so makes up for our limited consciousness, and helps to guide us towards consciousness and towards awareness of that which we are unconscious of. So it's interesting. It will be interesting, of course. And the opposition to Juno, which is exact on the 14th of September, so just a few days after the actual station retrograde, and which makes me think about reflecting upon that which we are faithful to, and does it deserve our faith and our fidelity, and what are our actions showing us? Again, relating back to Venus and the coming Venus square, what are our values, and do our actions align with that? And because of the nature of the square, there's bound to be some conflict there between our actions and our values, and so we get to see the discrepancy there and see what we're doing, and then we can make changes if we feel like, it's all about awareness, isn't it? It's all about figuring these things out, looking at where we're spending our time and money and energy. So yeah, Juno, Demetra George, of course, and her asteroid goddess Bible, Juno's urge toward union draws us from isolation into participation. And I think that is so true in the obvious relationship perspective, in our relationship to others, but as well, we always are relating to ourselves, in the sense that our mind is thinking, and we have this very mercurial month where we are we can use it wisely to relate to different parts of ourselves, and Juno aids us in that, rather than allowing things to be merely projected upon the faces of others, but actually withdrawing those projections as much as we possibly can over and over again. It's relentless, and it's really challenging and confronting sometimes, and it's actually so valuable. It will support all this aspectual activity between, as Juno passes through the final degrees of Libra. We'll square Pluto, we'll square Venus in Cancer, we'll go on to oppose Eris on the 2nd of September, and then make a harmonious aspect to the lunar nodes on the 6th of September before squaring Saturn, and then ingressing into Scorpio on the 20th of September. So, which brings us to a whole other realm of that Juno archetype, and the deepening of this process, of this long process of Juno passing through Libra for many months, and has been so supportive of us, whether we recognize it or not. But it's worth reflecting on all of that while Mars is retrograde, I believe, because just looking at how Juno helps us to relate inner parts of ourselves to each other, and then how that helps us to relate to outside others, and as well looking at how our actions belie our fidelity in one direction or another, and is that true for us? Is that aligned with our integrity? And is that in relation to Mars in Aries, is that the right action? So the dark moon time ahead of the new moon, I think it's dark moons can be challenging, of course, and those waning crescent times, and the disillusionment and confusion as that mutable cross is excited by the Mars retrograde. And the discomfort in the uncertainty and the increasingly intolerable, like the difficulty of that Mars square to Saturn, is bound to heat up in our lives. Are we able to lean into it to some extent, and to become curious about what the anxiety or whatever those negative emotions are that emerge within us? What is that leading us to? What are they trying to bring our awareness to? What do they want to tell us as our guides? The divine influxes, as William Blake so wisely calls the emotions. So the Virgo new moon is exact at 25 degrees of Virgo on the 17th of September at 7 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time. The mutable cross involving the lunar nodes there, the trine to Capricorn Copia and Saturn, specifically a partile trine there between the new moon and Saturn. The cardinal T-square that is very active between Juno, Mars and Capricorn, and the third quarter square between Mercury and Jupiter. So that crisis in action this month as Mercury advances to oppose Mars, which will occur exactly in Libra season, of course, but is applying at this new moon, so this new lunar cycle, and the station retrograde of Libra as well, which will be a big part of Libra season. So just reflecting on, as we look at this square, this new moon, this T-square, I should say, between the new moon and the lunar nodes, and the opposition as well, of course, to Neptune retrograde. So feeling into all of that possible disillusionment, the confusion, the lack of clarity, the uncertainty, all of our defenses against all of that by escaping into whatever mode of choice we like, for avoiding the discomfort, the discord of Eris, that inner discord, all those emotions that we don't want to feel and don't want to own and don't want to recognize and don't want to name and don't, we disinvite them rather than allowing them to come in and teach us what we need to learn. On a more philosophical kind of level, there's that thinking about our belief systems, our worldview, and the conditioning that we have all been subject to, not only in our in the broad scheme of things, but even in our personal lives, and what have we been subject to in our lives that has shaped how we look at things, and does it actually fit with our reality? And so that could be a theme in coming with that new moon, that Virgo cycle, lunar cycle coming at the end of the solar Virgo cycle. This beautiful painting, which is not a very good quality on this image, it comes from the Leona Archer, the harvesters, and of course just the inclusion of the wheat, which I like to point to. And so another little quote from Elaine de Botton, that at the root of anger is optimism that's been frustrated. The Buddhists had it right. Life is suffering, which is so true. And in relation to the Mars retrograde in Aries, I think it's good to be aware of our expectations and what do we actually expect, and can we relax back into what's real. Also, just a little aside, is the asteroid Fortuna in relation to abundance, I'm going to say, conjunct to Neptune and Persephone retrograde at 17 degrees of Pisces. I want to leave on a somewhat positive note in that sense. And some more wisdom from Leonard Cohen. The world is full of conflicts and full of things that cannot be reconciled, but there are moments when we can reconcile and embrace the whole mess, and that's what I mean by hallelujah. Of course, his very famous song Hallelujah, and this very ancient image here of Fortuna, the Roman goddess, depicted here with the Wheel of Fortune in her right hand and the cornucopia in her left hand, and just the trying to remember in Virgo season, which can sometimes bring us to awareness through that critical eye of what's lacking, but as well to count our many blessings, or count our few blessings, or however many blessings we've got, but to count them, to thank heaven for small mercies, because things can always get worse. So we need to be grateful for what good we have got in our lives, and there's always something, at least I hope for everybody, there's always something, and I believe that there always is something. I guess I hang on to that with my Sag moon. Finally, I'm going to finish with this poem from Kate Tempest. Indulge me a moment. In the old days, the myths were stories we used to explain ourselves. But how can we explain the way we hate ourselves, the things we've made ourselves into, the way we break ourselves into, the way we overcomplicate ourselves? But we are still mythical. We are still permanently trapped somewhere between the heroic and the pitiful. We are still godly. That's what makes us so monstrous. But it feels like we've forgotten we're much more than the sum of all the things that belong to us. The empty skies rise over the benches where the old men sit. They are desolate and friendless, and the young men spit. Inside they're delicate, but outside they're reckless, and I reckon that these are our heroes, these are our legends, that face on the street you walk past without looking at, or that face on the street that walks past without looking back, or the man in the supermarket trying to keep his kids out of his trolley, or the woman by the post box fighting with her brolly. Every single person has a purpose in them burning. Look again and allow yourself to see them. Millions of characters, each with their own epic narratives, singing it's hard to be an angel until you've been a demon. The sky is so perfect it looks like a painting, but the air is so thick that we feel like we're fainting. Still, the myths in this city have always said the same thing, about how all we need is a place to belong, how all we need is to know what's right from what's wrong, and how we all need to struggle to find out for ourselves which side we are on. Thanks everybody for being here. Google Kate Tempest, she's really cool. And I hope to see you all, or not see you, but you maybe see me next month. Thanks for indulging me in my exercise of putting myself out there. And I realise I've come to that quincunx, the Virgo point, and from the trine, my optimistic point in, I was very emboldened to do this Virgo talk until it came to the time to finally do it, where I finally forged out a couple of hours to record this. And I really appreciate people sticking with me, because I know it hasn't been perfect. And anyway, I'm forging on, and I'm enjoying creating these for you all, and I am so appreciative that you're watching them and hopefully getting something out of it, like I am too. And yeah, that's it, I guess. Thanks again so much, everyone. See ya next month. Is it?